Throughout the many millennia of Tamriel's history, many forms of religion have risen and fallen, as different cultures in different times cultivate different relationships with the eternal Aedra of Aetherius and the infinite Daedra of Oblivion. One thing that men, mer, and beastfolk have in common, however, is that their faiths are almost always polytheistic, featuring the worship of many gods or primordial spirits. This might seem an obvious development in a high fantasy universe where many gods have been demonstratively proven to exist. However, there was a time when it was not. Throughout much of the First Era, a time set thousands of years before the events of the mainline Elder Scrolls games, there existed a fanatic, monotheistic cult which spread like wildfire across Tamriel, professed that there was only one true god on Nurlan, and his worship must be enforced through violence. That alone might be surprising enough, if not for the fact that the founding prophet of this cult was a talking monkey. A talking monkey who led a theocratic coup upon the most powerful human empire on Tamriel, orchestrated a genocide, and created a movement that shattered the very concept of time itself. Welcome to our video on the story of Marukh and the Alessian Order. Before we get into the story of how a talking monkey reshaped the land of Dawn's beauty, we must first paint the picture of the world he was born into. Over 7,000 years before the events of Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim, the continent of Tamriel was dominated by the Elves, known in their own tongues as the Mer. The most powerful of these elvish polities was the Empire of the Aelids, or Heartland High Elves. An offshoot of the Altmer of the Somerset Isles, the Aelids presided over a magically sophisticated civilization in what is now the province of Cyrodiil. As elven civilization flourished, a culturally diverse tapestry of early mannish tribes, known collectively as the Needs, were also pollinating themselves across the Tamrielic heartland. The question of whether it was men or mer who first arrived on Tamriel is a matter of intense debate, but the result of their first contact was not. The Aelids enslaved the prehistoric men of Tamriel and subjugated them to unimaginable cruelty. Unlike their ultimate cousins, many Aelid factions spurned the worship of their Aedra ancestors, and instead turned to the worship of the perfidious Daedra. These deities exalted the virtues of decadent cruelty, and their Aelid worshippers indulged their wicked gods by subjecting their slaves to horrific fates, torturing them in gory rituals such as gut gardening and flesh sculpting. Under Aelid rule, the Needs of Cyrodiil languished in their flesh pits, treated as less than cattle. Yet, as the founding of the Camoran dynasty in the forests of Valenwood marked year zero of recorded Tamrielic history, the balance of power between man and mer would begin to shift forever in man's favor. Sometime in the early First Era, a Nedic woman prayed on the sacred hill of Sancretor. There she received a vision from Akatosh, the king of the dragons. The chief of the divines imbued her with the blood of dragons, and gifted her the magically enchanted Amulet of Kings. The slave who received this vision was named Alessian, and now charged by divine blessing, she became a queen, leading a massive slave uprising against Aelid rule. This slave uprising, which history now remembers as the Alessian Revolt, is one of the most mythologized events in Tamrielic history. So much so that trying to scry the historical truth of it from the legends is functionally impossible. And indeed, the legends are truly fantastical. Some stories claim that one of Alessia's mightiest generals was a giant winged bull who happened to be her lover, for whom she bore a child named Belhaza, the first Minotaur. Other stories claim that Alessia's slave armies were carried to victory by a certain immortal, time-traveling, homicidal, genocidal cyborg whose relentless slaughter of Aelid armies and champions has made him one of the most infamously iconic characters in the zeitgeist of the Elder Scrolls lore community. On top of her slave armies, Alessia had many other allies. One of these was the First Empire of the Nords. Perhaps ironically, Alessia's second key ally were the Elves themselves. The Aelids had not been a unified society, being divided among those who worshipped the Daedra and those who worshipped the Aedra. The Aedra-worshipping Aelids had long conflicted with the Daedra worshippers and sided with Alessia against their fellow Heartland High Elves. With the help of her demigod champions and her Nordic and Aedric Aelid allies, Alessia prevailed, breaking the power of the Aelid Empire. The slave queen died in 266, but she left behind a Cyrodiilic heartland now ruled by its former slave caste, a state known as the Alessian Empire or the First Empire of Man. It is at this critical junction of the story that we will take a brief interlude away from the blood-soaked ancient battlefields of Cyrodiil and pan southwest to the forests of Valenwood. Valenwood is primarily known as the home of the Bosmer, or Wood Elves, but is home to many other sapient races as well, chief among them the Imga. The Imga are a race of intelligent, talking monkeys who thrive in the forests of Valenwood alongside the Wood Elves, where they can quickly climb through the tall trees with relative ease. According to the first edition of the Pocket Guide to the Empire, the Imga see the High Elves as their masters and as a portrait of an ideal civilized society. Idolizing the Altmer of Somerset for their high culture and sophistication, the Great Apes go to desperate measures to emulate the High Elves, wearing capes, practicing with the dueling sword, and attempting to speak with perfect enunciation and courtly manners, despite their gravelly, baritone voices. As the Imga have yet to appear in a mainline Elder Scrolls game, what little information exists about them portrays them as a race of unserious comic relief monkeys. And yet, the legacy the main Imga of today's story left upon the land of Tamriel was anything but funny. Sometime after the founding of the First Empire of Man, there lived an Imga named Marukh. It is safe to assume he was probably born and raised in Valenwood like the majority of his species, but the details of his personal life survive only in very fragmented sources. At some point in his life, Marukh was said to have received a sacred vision from the spirit of Alessian, subjecting him to a spiritual awakening, which an ancient source, titled The Illusion of Death, describes as such. And his sight was seared, and his tongue was swollen, and his pelt was mottled, and his left thumb pointed ever at the stars of the tower, and ever did the shade of Alesh speak to him serrated words that rasped his concept organ and brought him to wisdom through affliction. No, the narrator did not just have a stroke. Like much of Tamriel's ancient lore, Marukh's vision is wreathed in layers upon layers of esoterica, which we do not have the time to fully unpack here. The main takeaway here is that, allegedly, the spirit of Alessian revealed to Marukh the existence of one true god. Armed with a new religious purpose, Marukh travelled to Cyrodiil to reveal this divine truth to the men of the Empire. Furnished with unfathomable charisma and zeal, the mad monkey prophet quickly attracted a huge following within the Tamrielic heartland. His band of disciples were soon organized into the Alessian Order, so named for the divine empress who had revealed her truths to the monkey. Within a generation, the Alessian Order had infiltrated all of its highest offices of the First Empire of Man, becoming more influential than the emperors and empresses themselves. By the 3rd century of the First Era, an ape from the jungle had completely transformed the most powerful human nation on Tamriel into a religious theocracy molded in his image. During the immediate generations after the fall of the Ayleid Empire, the land of Cyrodiil remained a very diverse place, inhabited not only by the many Nedic tribes, but also by the Syro-Nords and the Aedra-worshipping Ayleids who had fought as allies alongside Alessian. Alessian had embarked on a policy of cultural integration, promoting a new pantheon of 8 divines for all her subjects to worship, an amalgamation of Nedic, Nordic and Elven deities placed together into a single roster to create common religious ground between the men and elves of the First Era Cyrod. One has to imagine, then, that Alessian would surely have disapproved as the monkey prophet rejected her 8 divines and forcefully imposed the worship of his one god upon the citizens of the empire she had created. The exact nature of the monotheistic deity created by Marukh and the Alessian Order is again wreathed in a lot of esoterica we cannot get into. Essentially, however, they believed that the only true deity was Akatosh, the dragon god of time. The Order rejected the notion that Akatosh was the king of a pantheon of other gods, of both mannish and merish origin, instead insisting upon the belief that there was only Akatosh, and all other gods were merely a reflection of his aspects. The worship of this one true god of time was dictated by the 77 Inflexible Doctrines, a codex of religious laws supposedly passed to Marukh by the spirit of Alessian. Most of these doctrines have been lost to time, but in their gist, they enforced the strict monotheism of Akatosh's unitary essence, forbade traffic with demons, and upheld a judicial philosophy in which all are guilty until they have proven themselves innocent, which is still the guiding system of the modern Tamrielic legal system. Unlike the rest of his mer-idolizing species, Marukh despised elf-kind to his simian core, and despite being founded by an alien monkey, the Alessian Order he created took the shape of a human supremacist organization, devoted to purging elven culture from Tamriel. The primary victims of this xenophobia were the remaining Ayleids in Cyrodiil. By the 3rd century of the First Era, the Alessian Order was fully embarked on a policy of ethnic cleansing, riling up the poor human masses to sack Ayleid temples and terrorize Ayleid cities. The only Ayleids who remained in Cyrodiil at this time were those who had fought alongside Alessia, but this did not prevent the fanatic followers of the Monkey from slaughtering the Heartland High Elves without remorse. By the 5th century of the First Era, nearly every Ayleid lordship in Cyrodiil had been abolished, with the populations within them fleeing to the safety of Mer-ruled lands in High Rock and Valenwood. The last Ayleid kingdom, Nenilata, fell in the First Era 482. Distinct Ayleid communities would endure among the Wood Elves of Valenwood and High Elves of High Rock for some time, before being assimilated by those populations in the ensuing generations, heralding the eventual extinction of the race. Another major victim of the Alessian Order's purges were the Minotaurs, once a proud, intelligent warrior race, who, like the Adric Ayleids, had fought alongside Alessia for human freedom. The followers of the Monkey denigrated them as monsters, little better than ogres and trolls. Consequently, the Minotaurs were driven beyond the fringes of civilization, where they remain today in the forgotten caves and valleys of Cyrodiil, enduring on as degenerated, primitive versions of their past glory. In addition to the violent purges he orchestrated within Cyrodiil, Marukh was also responsible for igniting several bloody wars, which tore other regions of Tamriel asunder. As the Prophet Most Simeon's anti-elven teachings spread, relations between Cyrodiil and the Wood-Elven Kingdom of Valenwood understandably worsened. With the two polities on the brink of war, the Monkey Prophet received an unexpected ally in King Borgus of Skyrim. The Nords of Skyrim were up there with the Alessian Order as Tamriel's #1 elf haters, but they had an ancient culture and religion of their own. Borgus, however, abandoned his ancestors' gods and commanded the people of Skyrim to adopt the Monkey Man's unitary deity. In First Era 369, the Nord King travelled to Cyrodiil to urge a joint war upon the Bosmer. The Wood Elf response to this existential threat was swift and vicious. Since the Dawn Age, the Bosmer possessed an innate ability to transform en masse into a tidal horde of feral eldritch forest monsters that stampede out from their homeland, devour all in their path, and when left with no surviving targets, turn upon themselves in a cannibalistic orgy. The Bosmer had only invoked the Wild Hunt when absolutely necessary, and did so to thwart the genocidal ambitions of the Alessian Order. So it was that, as a consequence of throwing his lot in with the Monkey Prophet, the chieftain of all the Nords was swallowed up by a mass of pulsating, cannibalistic skin changers. The death of King Borgus marked the end of the Alessian Order's rapid rise, and it was probably around this time that Marukh expired as well. Thereafter, leadership of the Alessian Order was taken up by a succession of archprelates, who would preside over the theocracy's slow and agonizing decline. The next century saw the Alessians handed 2 more fat elves. In the western half of Cyrodiil, a region known as Kolovia, a warlord by the name of Rislav of Skingrad rose in revolt, rejecting the one god of the Alessian Order and defeating the forces of the Alessian Empire in battle, freeing much of Kolovia from Marukhist tyranny. Other polities in conflict with the Alessians at that point included the Nords of Skyrim, who wished to undo Borgus's laws to restore their old gods, and the Dureni, a powerful High Elven clan ruling over much of what is now High Rock. Inspired by the Colovians' victory, Patriarch Riain of the Dureni and High King Hoag Merkiller of Skyrim formed an alliance against the Alessian Order. Indeed, the obnoxious religious tyranny of the Alessians must have been really bad if they compelled a Nord named Merkiller to ally with a High Elf against them. In any case, the Dureni and Nords dealt the Alessian Empire a crushing defeat at the Battle of Glenumbra Moors in First Era 482, assisted by an army of Ayleid exiles, taking revenge on the Alessians for driving them out of their homeland. Thereafter, the influence of the First Empire of Man and its Alessian Order puppet masters was more or less contained to the Nibene region of Cyrodiil. Yet, even after its military defeats, the Alessian Order was not finished with being disruptive to everyone and everything in Tamriel. Within the mortal realm of Mundus, most Aedra of Aetherius are worshipped in different ways by different cultures, and thus manifest in different ways with different faces. One of the most prominent examples of this was the deity the Alessian Order claimed to worship. To mankind, Akatosh was the king of dragons and god of linear time, but to the Elves, he was Auri-El, their first king and greatest ancestor. This belief was completely and utterly anathema to the zealots of the Alessian order, and soon there emerged a subgroup within the theocracy known as the Marukh Selective, who sought to purge Akatosh of his elven influences. Named for their late monkey prophet, they were said to have performed a profane ritual which channeled very Arbis itself, the cosmic chaos of the universe, in an attempt to rewrite the nature of the god of time. A staff or tower, or one represented within the other, appeared before them. The secret masters danced upon it until it writhed and trembled. The tower split into 8 pieces, and time broke, becoming non-linear. This phenomenon was known as a dragon break, and would happen several more times throughout Tamrielic history. But it was the followers of the monkey prophet who broke time for the first, time. This crazy kaleidoscopic time bubble lasted for what modern Tamrielic scholars estimate to be around 1,000 years, from the First Era 1200 to 2208. Historical accounts of those who lived during this time, or rather times plural, are scant, incomprehensible, and self-contradicting. Some Cyrodiilic accounts from the souls of the emperors in the Amulet of Kings describe how Cyrodiil became an empire across the stars, while others describe it as becoming an egg. Khajiit accounts recorded kittens giving birth to their own fathers. In short, the whole thing was a complete fever dream. The reign of the Alessian order was said to have endured for over 2,000 years, but considering that about 1,000 of those years took place within an abstract, non-linear time bubble thingy, their tenure as the dominant power in Cyrodiil was probably shorter in actuality. When the chronological wound caused by the Marukh finally healed and time became linear again, the days of the monkey prophet's monotheistic cult were numbered. The order finally came to an end in First Era 2321, with the outbreak of the War of Righteousness, a conflict in which the various Clovian and Breton kingdoms of Western Cyrodiil and High Rock brought an end to the monotheistic theocracy with the help of rebellious Nibanaeans in Eastern Cyrodiil who had grown tired of the order's excesses and cruelties. With the collapse of the Alessian order came also the collapse of the First Empire of Man, whose desiccated corpse it had been puppeteering for centuries. An emperor bearing Akatosh's Amulet of Kings would not again rule from Cyrodiil until the rise of Remen 500 years later. More importantly, the faith of the one god was abolished, and worship of the 8 divines was restored. While the religion of the monkey prophet had long since been consigned to history, his legacy on the history of Cyrodiil was not. If not for the Great Ape, then the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion might have been a very different game. The Ayleid cities the player explores might have been living societies, rather than derelict ruins, and the Minotaur encountered in the overworld may have been the player's friends and allies, rather than faceless monsters to cut down. It is true that the history of Tamriel is one of constant metaphysical turmoil, but the First Era reign of the Alessian Order in particular was a period of history where no one was monkeying around. More videos on the Elder Scrolls universe are on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we will catch you on the next one.